He hasn't broken any rules.
Well, you're the only person in Britain that thinks that, Brendan.
No, I'm not. It's written in black and white.
No, it isn't.
The unluckiest man in Britain right now, the minister who chose the straw today is the Health Minister, Ed Argar, who is on a media round, probably wishing he'd got stuck in a lift as Michael Gove did yesterday, missing many of his interviews. But no, didn't get stuck in a lift. He's joining us right now. Good morning to you, Mr. Argar.
Morning, Julia.
Good morning. I bet you've really been looking forward to your media round this morning. Let's talk about...
I always enjoy talking to you and your listeners.
Well, I don't know. We're going to stick to that in 10 minutes' time. Let's talk about another day and another lockdown party being emerging. 20th of May 2020, just 5 days after the last lockdown party we knew about, the cheese and wine party, for which we've got photographs. We've now got an email from the Prime Minister's principal private secretary inviting people to a bring your own booze party. 100 people invited, 40 people attended. Among those were the Prime Minister and his wife. Is it tenable for any of those people to still be in a job tomorrow?
Well, there's a number of points there, Julia. First of all, you said those people attended. We don't know. I wasn't there. We've seen the allegations. We've seen the email that was reported overnight. And we've seen various sources to various journalists about what they reported has happened. That's why it's absolutely right that Sue Gray, a very senior civil servant, the greatest integrity and who operates without fear or favour, is looking into this, because I think I and your listeners want to know the facts of what happened. We all remember in the past 2 years, and I've been coming on your show for a number of months now, probably over the 2 years of the pandemic, and we've talked on a number of occasions about the number of people who've died, and it's 150,230. And also
those are the people who died of COVID. Many others have died of other things.
Well, I was about to come on to that, as well as people who've died from other causes, and the huge impact that restrictions have had on all of our daily lives in terms of mental health, in terms of family life, and in terms of livelihoods. And so I can understand why, in the light of these allegations, people are angry, but also upset and hurt. And that's why it's right we get to the facts. And that's why I think it's important Ms. Gray is able to look into all this and to report back on what actually happened, not just here, but with the other allegations
If someone asked me what I was doing on the 20th of May 2020, do you know what I'd do? I'd look at my electronic diary and it would show that I was on air in the morning. And I remember it was being a lovely day because that was the very first day since the pandemic began that I was able to visit my mother in her late 70s and meet her outdoors, because we had recently been told we were allowed to meet one other person outdoors and I wouldn't be breaking the law. And in the position that I'm in as a public broadcaster, I thought it was important to obey those rules. So I remember what I was doing. Why does the Prime Minister need to wait for a report by Sue Gray to know whether he did or he did not attend a party in his own garden with his own staff? Can't he not just look at his own diary?
I think that question is part of that broader issue of what did or didn't happen on that day and on other occasions. I think he's right to say it would be wrong to comment on particular aspects or answer particular questions while she's conducting because I think it's important that Ms. Gray is able to conduct her investigation without commentary from ministers or others.
In what way does it inhibit Ms. Sue Gray's ability to conduct an inquiry for the Prime Minister to say, yes, I was, or no, I was not at that party?
I mean, my view is that it is important she is allowed to do what she does without him, without me, without others prejudging that or commenting on the things she may be investigating.
Was he at the party?
Or commenting on them. She will investigate without fear or favour what happened, what did or didn't happen with following that email, and who was there.
Edward Argar, were you at that party?
No, I wasn't.
Hold on a minute. Let's clarify. So you're able to answer that question, and somehow that is not in any way damaging Sue Case's inquiry into this, but the Prime Minister can't answer that question.
Well, I don't work in Number 10. I was working at home. I glued to Zoom or Teams throughough that time, buying ventilators or getting ventilators, making sure we had hospital capacity, setting up nightingales and those sort of things.
I think we might have lost the line. Edward Argar, are you still there? Apologies. We're going to try and get him back up on the phone line. Apologies for that. I don't think there's anything sinister going on, folks. So he is between various different interviews. But let's just remind everyone what the rules were back in May 2020. By the way, this was 2 days before that Barnard Castle dash by Dominic Cummings, which you didn't find out about for quite some time. But there was no mixing indoors allowed at all. No mixing even outdoors with other members of another household. In your own garden, crucially, you were allowed to meet only recently from 13th of May. So only for a week were people allowed to meet in a public place, and then only 2 metres apart. Ed Argar, we got you back on the line. We're just going through what the rules were at the time. Non-essential shops were shut. Pubs, restaurants, all hospitality remained closed.
I think I lost you for a moment.
No, we understand. But people couldn't attend the funerals of loved ones. People couldn't visit their loved ones in care homes, in hospitals. No children were allowed to have a birthday party. Playgrounds were locked up, for goodness sake. Schools were closed to children of non-essential workers. So the vast majority. And at this time, this email, and no one is disputing that this email from the Prime Minister's Principal Private Secretary suggested, well, we've all been very busy. Let's enjoy the lovely weather and let's have a party. An hour after, the then Culture Secretary Oliver Dowden had gone on television and reiterated to everyone what the rules were and insisted you could only meet one other person from another household at the same time. It defies belief that anyone in Number 10 who attended that party didn't think that they were breaking the rules that their own government had imposed, doesn't it?
Well, I think the rules were clear. You're right, Oliver Dowden set them out earlier that day, and they were very clear. And if I recall, I don't think it was until the beginning of June that you could start meeting up to 6 people outside. So the rules were clear. I've seen that email. I don't know the background or the context of it, but I've seen that email published by ITV, I think, last night. Yep. And that's why it's right that it's fully investigated transparently. And equally, I do understand, I gather this morning that the Met have said they're in contact with, I think, the Cabinet Office about this. So equally, I'm not going to comment on that because I don't know the conversations they've had or not, but clearly that conversation has taken place.
But given 20,000 people or so have been prosecuted for breaking lockdown rules, 2,000 at Westminster Magistrate Court alone, of course, where Downing Street is, if the Prime Minister is investigated and his staff investigated by the police, if Sue Case establishes that, yes, these people were at this party, it did take place, and it's very clear they were in breach of lockdown rules, should any of those people, up to and including the Prime Minister himself, remain in their jobs? Because I wouldn't be in my job if I'd done that. Well,
I think he was clear before Christmas when he was talking about other allegations in the comments, that he could understand why people found, I think it was in relation to the video about that, why people found that sickening, and was clear that Sue Gray must conclude her inquiry, but that appropriate disciplinary action should be taken against those who she determines broke the rules. I don't want to prejudge what she will or won't find, or who she does or doesn't look in that context, but he did make, Downing Street made clear that they would expect disciplinary action to follow, dependent upon her conclusions. And I would agree with that.
The truth is that many ministers, many backbench Tory MPs, many Tory party members who very supportive of Boris Johnson, a lot of his policies, very supportive of him getting elected and being in Number 10, delivering Brexit, are absolutely furious right now, and they think his position is untenable. That's true, isn't it?
Well, that's not what I'm hearing in the comments. I was there last night voting and around the chamber. That's not what I'm hearing from colleagues, but they do want to know what happens. They do want to see the findings of Sue Gray's inquiry. They want to know the facts, just as I do, because there's a lot of allegations, there's a lot of reports out there, and I think I think that the British public, your listeners, will want to know the facts and what actually happened. So I look forward to her report, and I hope and I believe that she, as she normally does, will conduct it without fear or favour and be totally open.
We don't really need to wait for the report. As I've said, the Prime Minister could tell us exactly what happened. He was there anyway, could he not? 26th of January is the date when the next set of restrictions are due, or the current set of restrictions are due to fall. March, when the emergency legislation is due to end. Do you have any expectation that we'll be back out of all restrictions on the 26th of January?
Well, I'm not going to say, after doing this for 2 years through the pandemic, I'm not going to prejudge what things will look like then. But what I would say, which I hope is encouraging, is firstly, we are seeing a much slower slowing of new cases, particularly in London. We're seeing hospitalisations slowing. There's still huge pressure in the system there, but the rate of growth is slow. We're not seeing
some of those modelling predictions or modelling scenarios coming to pass. So I hope, and there's nothing in the data that I can see today, but we'll see it changes day by day and we look at it day by day. There's nothing I can see that that suggests that it's getting worse, and I want to see those restrictions removed as soon as it's safe to do so. And I very much hope that will be later this month, but of course we look at it every day.
But this is it. In terms of as soon as it's safe to do so, we've already had the evidence from the Department for Health, Department for Education, that the masks are completely unnecessary in classrooms, and that some of the rules that we've got are exactly the sorts of rules that people in Number 10 have been flouting all along. Do you think that actually what this has all shown, lockdown parties and also all of the different restrictions we've seen across the UK with differing outcomes, in fact the outcomes being better in England than for Scotland and Wales with strict rules, that actually the evidence is now really, really clear that not only do we not need restrictions, those restrictions cause extra harm, and that learning to live with the virus does involve us following guidance and advice only, not having rules and restrictions on our lives being brought in for just us but not the people making the rules to follow, which are based on, frankly, laughable modelling. Isn't that the lesson we've really learned?
A number of things there. I think the rules are there and have been for everyone, and the British public have made amazing sacrifices in that respect. In terms of restrictions, I think you and I spoke about this before Christmas. Plan B, I think, was proportionate and measured and was a necessary response at that time. But I don't want to see any restrictions in place a day longer than is necessary. I want to see them go, and I want good old British common sense to replace it with guidance and advice, and us able to live with this virus and get back to normal as soon as we possibly can.
Sure that there are very few who think that Boris Johnson has any kind of credibility left. Let's talk to Brendan, who's in Hartlepool. Hi, Brendan.
Good morning. How are you?
Very well, sir. Very good morning to you. Welcome to the show. It's a big day today. You're kicking us off, Brendan. What are you got to say?
Right. In front of me now, in black and white, I've got the health protection brackets coronavirus restrictions brackets all tiers brackets England regulations 2020.
Right.
Permitted organised gatherings. A gathering is a permitted organisation gathering for the purposes of these regulations if paragraph 2 or 3 applies. Paragraph 2. This paragraph applies to a gathering if it takes place on or at a premises other than a private dwelling, which are organised by a business, a charitable, benevolent or philanthropic organised institution or a public body. What is the government if it's not a public body?
Absolutely right. Operating in a public house.
This gathering took part in his back garden.
Right.
It's not a public place. The regulations on meeting in public places for individuals, yes, this is not a public place. And the regulations specifically say you can gather there. So what are you going on about Boris has broken regulations for? They hasn't broken any regulations.
Well, how are you making it not a public place? One, it is owned by the public, right? Therefore, it is not a private...
You and me aren't allowed to go in there wandering around to walk our dogs.
No, we're not. But that doesn't mean that it's not a public place. That doesn't mean it's not a public place, though. You're not allowed...
I suspect that this regulation was written because they wanted to have meetings in their public places.
But you, Brendan, I'm afraid, will be accused of nitpicking, right? Because it's all about the spirit of the law as well as it is the letter of the law, okay? And if the Prime Minister tells you, and if every government minister tells you, that if you are outside of your own home, where you're only allowed to mix with people who live in that home because you're not allowed to invite anybody in, that when you are outside of your own home, you can only mix with one person. If the government themselves, who made those rules, are quite happily meeting and mingling and asking to meet and mingle with upwards of 100 people, which turned out to be just about 30, to have a party, to have a drink, which you cannot do, then that is hypocrisy in anybody's book, and I don't care what the rules say.
Well, fair enough. We'll agree to differ on that one, but he hasn't broken any regulations.
Well, that hasn't actually been determined yet. The whole point of the investigation is to discover whether he hasn't broken any regulations. Now, if he hasn't broken any regulations, why has he asked someone to investigate whether he has or not?
It's because it's Boris. You know what he's like.
Well,
he likes to
because if what you say is true, right? If what he did was to write those regulations in order specifically to have gatherings in Downing Street, he would have said so. He wouldn't have gone to the trouble of trying to get somebody to investigate whether he was even there or not. I mean, the guy is disingenuous. There's no question about it. And if you want to defend him because you like him, that's one thing. But you cannot defend what he's done.
I can for this. I think he should go for the other things he's done, like the green agenda and stuff like that, and not sorting out the migrant crisis.
So you think he should resign anyway?
He hasn't broken any rules.
Well, you're the only person in Britain that thinks that, Brendan.
No, I'm not. It's written in black and white.
No, it isn't. It's not. But we'll agree to differ. Great call, Brendan. Thank you very much indeed. Brendan says I'm talking absolute cobblers.
Hello, Mike. Morning.
Morning.
To you.
What can I do for you?
Hope you're well. Well, I'm not sure I agree with you on this. Your first caller on this topic over an hour ago now read out the rules. And from what he read out, Johnson hasn't broken the rules over this gathering or party. It is entirely within the rules.
No, it's not. Rubbish. I'm not buying that. I am not buying it.
Read them out, Mike, and I've not.
Well, he read out what he said were the rules as he saw them, right?
Have you checked what he read was right or not?
Well, no, I haven't checked whether what he read was right or not, because it's not about whether what he read out was right or not. The question I've got for you is
Mike.
No, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's not. No, I'm sorry. The law is not the law, as you can plainly see. If I walk down the street and I'm told to wear a mask and I don't wear one, what happens to me?
Well, you've broken the law.
No, I haven't. I haven't broken the law because nothing happens to me, right? Nothing.
If the law's explicit, you must wear a mask at all times.
Yes, which is what it says. Which is what it says on the underground. I have not broken the law because you can get an exemption, right? Therefore, it's not the law, because if it was a law, you would be found guilty of it and you would be charged with a crime. But everyone who's ever been charged with any of this stuff has never had to pay a fine because they can't enforce it, right? The bottom line here, Nick, is that they have told people that they had to behave in certain ways, and they have not behaved in those ways, therefore breaking the contract of trust with the people. It's as simple as that. Politics is not just about breaking the law. Matt Hancock didn't break any laws, did he?
Yes.
What did he do?
Well, he stuck his tongue down the woman's throat.
Well, that's not against the law. I don't know where you live, Nick, but that's fair enough where I live.
Depends which party you
go to. But it's not against the law, is it?
So it's a little more than a social distance.
Yeah, but you see what I'm saying here. He resigned because he had to resign, because it was untenable for him to stay in his job, and we've got the same situation here.
I don't agree. The job that he's doing requires gatherings.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Why does it?
Oh, come on, Michael. Of course.
Why does it? Why do you? If you work, hang on, Nick. If you work in Downing Street, right? Why do you have to have a wine and cheese party at the end of the day? Why?
It doesn't matter whether it was tea and biscuits, wine and cheese.
It does matter. Yes, it
does. Anything else. It's people needing to work closely in a proximity with each other.
But they're working together already, right? So they're having meetings during the day. Why do they need to have a meeting that requires wine and cheese at the end of the day than when they've already been talking to each other all day?
Because every organisation which is solving a new crisis, a problem, needs blue sky thinking.
Really?
Which,
I see.
Which requires a certain. You have meetings at work for your shows, which.
Well, I'll tell you what. In May 2020, do you know how many times we had a gathering after my show which involved drinking and lots of people? Do you know how many
times did you answer questions from the press at 5 o'clock?
I'm always working, Nick. I never stopped working.
No.
That's not the point. You haven't answered my question. My question to you is, how many times do you think I had a party or a gathering after my work finished because I needed to talk to my work colleagues at least for a couple of hours with some wine and cheese? How many of those do you think I had?
With the wine and cheese, no idea, but I'm sure gatherings of some kind...
No, I had no gatherings because I came to work and I went straight home. Simple, Nick, because that's what people do when you're asked to do that sort of responsible thing. And I can't believe that you're sitting there telling me that Boris hasn't broken the rules, because even he thinks he's broken the rules, and he'll probably admit to it in about 5 minutes' time.
So the Culture Secretary has endorsed calls by Tory MPs for the BBC to be made to play God Save the Queen at the end of their daily programming.
That the singing of the national anthem is something that provides great sense of unity and pride in our nation. And so in this year of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, will the Minister take steps to encourage public broadcasters to play the national anthem and ensure that the BBC restore it at the end of the day's programming before it switches to News 24.
That was Conservative MP Andrew Rosendale in that exchange yesterday in the Chamber, in the House of Commons. He joins us now. Andrew, good afternoon to you. I think we can hear him. Hang on, we're going to press some buttons, get our man with the spanner. Andrew, can you hear us now?
Good afternoon, Ian.
Good afternoon.
Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Nice to have you with us.
Great to be on.
I mean, listen, some of us remember when the BBC used to play the national anthem.
Oh, 100%. When I was growing up, I always used to sometimes stay up quite late, 12:30.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, the national anthem would be played, only 30 seconds. But, as a teenager, it made me realise what the national anthem was and gave me a bit of pride in my country. And I didn't know the words then, but you learn the words. What happens today? We never hear the national anthem. We hardly ever hear it.
True.
The only time the BBC has played it in the last year is really, sadly, when the Duke of Edinburgh died, and maybe when the Queen delivers her speech on Christmas Day. It's never sung in schools. It's never played at the end of the day on BBC One anymore. I think this needs to be changed. I think patriotism is a good thing. And this year is, of course, the year of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. So what better year to restore the national anthem on the British Broadcasting Corporation and other media outlets than the Jubilee year?
It's interesting because I can't remember when it disappeared. I like yourself, Andrew, I can remember that treat of staying up a bit later than maybe you should have done. And suddenly the national anthem, and it was a bit of an event. It felt like that as a kid. And then at some point it went. I guess the 24-hour nature of the BBC and others saw to its demise.
Well, I can explain this. So what happened? It was in, believe it or not, 1997, the year of Tony Blair had just been elected. It was Call Britannia. Do you remember all of that stuff?
Yeah, absolutely.
In 97.
Yeah.
And this
was
was
a cracking year for the Conservatives, wasn't it?
Well, it was a cracking year for the Labour Party and Tony Blair, but there was some sort of, I think that was the start of the remnants, or the beginning, I think, of the woke type attitudes where these things are out of date and they're all old hat and we don't do them anymore. And I think the BBC decided to dump it, and they used the excuse of the fact that it's now 24-hour channel, which it's not. So BBC One do actually stop programming at a certain time, and they switch to News 24. So what I'm saying is that's no excuse for dumping the national anthem. What they should do is restore it at the point just before they switch to News 24. So we can still have it. It shouldn't be an excuse to get rid of the national anthem and never play it.
Let's bring in Jonathan Liss, political commentator. Jonathan, nice to have you on with us again. Would you be upstanding and proud to hear the national anthem played at the end of the BBC's conventional output at the end of the day?
I just think the whole conversation is such an irrelevance. Is this really the kind of discourse that we're now bringing into the culture wars? The BBC already plays the national anthem at 1 o'clock every single morning on Radio 4, if anyone wants to listen to it.
Are they still going?
If the BBC wants to play the national anthem before it goes to News 24, that's a matter of the BBC. It doesn't mean that we are any less patriotic, that people don't support the Queen. It doesn't mean that things have gone woke. It just means that things have evolved in a certain way, as the BBC has evolved over its 100-year history.
There it is, Andrew. It's just kind of become a bit irrelevant.
So what's basically being said here is that it evolves so that we abolish it when it used to be the tradition. I don't get that. And I think it is a complete excuse to say that because it's 24 hours, that means you don't play it anymore. I think it's very sad that young people grow up and they never hear the national anthem. They don't get to learn the words. They don't understand the importance of it. There are people who fought and died for our country's freedom and democracy. We have an incredible, proud nation with an amazing history of spreading human rights, freedom and democracy around the world. And yet our British Broadcasting Corporation on their main channel can't spend 30 seconds just once a day playing the national anthem. Do you know ITV used to do the same? They used to actually show pictures of the royal family and play the national anthem too. Used to have it in cinemas. This is a gradual, not an evolution, this is a gradual diminishing all the patriotic symbols. I mean, the same people that don't want the national anthem, I have to say, Ian, exactly the same people that say don't fly the flag. You know, that's a bit old-fashioned now. You know, only fly it on certain days. Thank goodness that attitude has been demolished. We do see the flag flying much more than we used to. Same with the national anthem. And what's wrong with it being sung in schools? Why can't a school assembly once a week have the children singing the national anthem and learning the importance of taking pride in their country?
Jonathan, I mean, put like that sounds quite reasonable. It is our national anthem. If the BBC can't play it, then who can? You've already said that Radio 4 give it a go each day, so why not on the BBC? Surely that's the perfect setting for the national anthem.
Well, as I've already said, if the BBC wanted to play the national anthem before it went on to News 24, that is a matter for the BBC. Well, I suppose the point is, why do we need to have this conversation? I suppose the broader point is, what I would say to someone like Andrew, it seems strange that people who talk about patriotism the whole time seem to have such a fragile sense of pride in their country that it becomes invested purely in symbols. I think that if you're really proud about Britain, you'd want to be talking about Britain's actual achievements. You'd be talking about things that actually matter to ordinary people.
You can do both, can't you?
Not exactly. You can do all these things. It's not one or the other. You can do them all.
But these people never seem to talk about the things that actually mean things to people in Britain, about their everyday experiences of life in Britain. It's always about the anthem, about flags. And there are two separate issues here about flying if you play the national anthem on the BBC at the end of the day, you wouldn't know what the words were because it's never used with words, with lyrics in that. So so teaching it in schools is a completely separate issue. And again, I'd want to know, if you were going to be doing that in schools, then would you be mandating it, or would you be saying it's a matter for the schools themselves? And if it's a matter for this, if it's about mandating it, how patriotic is that to force people to be patriotic? Surely it's a matter of personal choice.
Andrew.
First of all, you could effectively demolish all of our symbols and traditions and conventions and say, well, let's just talk about achievements rather than having any kind of symbolism. Is that what we're suggesting? If we have a national anthem, surely it should be played. Surely people should hear it sometimes rather than it never being played, or only when someone dies or when we see the Queen's speech on Christmas Day. I don't think that it's right that we should just discard these things. And we talk about it should be the BBC that decides. The BBC is a taxpayer-funded organisation. It is the state broadcaster. BBC One is the main channel of the United Kingdom, BBC One. If BBC One, the British Broadcasting Corporation, cannot play the national anthem for 30 seconds once a day, then I think that's deeply sad. And by the way, they scrapped it without any consultation, without asking, do people want it to be scrapped? This was decided by the BBC without anyone having any say over it. But unfortunately, this does mean we have discussions about these. You say you don't want a discussion about it. We're only having this discussion because they unilaterally got rid of it, and they've completely refused to consider restoring it, despite this being requested of them over and over again.
And Jonathan,
this is the Jubilee year, and this is the year to do it.
Okay, so it's a commemorative year, Jonathan. Final question to you, Jonathan. I mean, if you had a say in it, would you vote to have the national anthem back in?
I really don't have an opinion on it, to tell you the truth. I have no, the national anthem, some people love it, some people hate it. Personally, I would want a national anthem which was more inclusive, that said something about our actual country rather than one individual, but that's a separate issue. If the BBC wants to do it, it's a matter of the BBC. I just don't think that we need to have a national conversation about it.
And Andrew, you've raised it in Parliament. Where does this go now? Can somebody make Nadine Dorries, can she make the BBC play it?
Well, Nadine Dorries was very enthusiastic. She said it was a fantastic idea that I put forward. I have huge support from members of Parliament, not just the Conservative side, but people from other political parties as well. I just think the BBC should just concede that this is a nice thing to do for the Queen's Jubilee. The 6th of February is the day the Jubilee year starts. We have the most amazing head of state, 70 years on the throne. What a wonderful head of state we have, the longest serving head of state of any country on the planet. For goodness sake, let's play our national anthem on the 6th of February and let's play it from then onwards. If we do that, I think that most people will be very proud to hear the anthem of their country. So let's just do it and let's dump the PC woke stuff. Let's play our national anthem, be proud of our country.
Something I was talking about on the Drive show last night. If you don't know Molly May Hague, she is an influencer who became famous when she got a break in Love Island. And then since then, she's accepted brand deals. She became the creative director of, I think it's Pretty Little Thing is the clothing brand, and has essentially grasped every opportunity that she can in order to make something of herself. Well, she gave an interview on a podcast which was called The Diary of a CEO, where she spoke about her work ethic. She spoke about work ethic in general in order to try and achieve something in your life. And she has received a huge backlash for this. Before we discuss why, let's hear what she had to say.
When I've spoken about that before in the past, I have been slammed a little bit with people saying, like, it's easy for you to say that, you've grown up and you've not grown up in poverty, you've not grown up, with major money struggles. So for you to sit there and say that we all have the same 24 hours in a day, it's not correct. And I'm like, but technically what I'm saying is correct. We do. So I understand that obviously we all have different backgrounds and we're all raised in different ways and we do have different financial situations. But I think if you want something enough, you can achieve it. And it just depends to what lengths you want to go to get where you want to be in the future. And I'll go to any length. Like, I've worked my absolute off to get where I am now. A lot of people don't think that and believe that, but it's true. I've worked so hard.
So there we go. What's wrong with that? Why is what she's saying, where if you work hard, you can achieve your dreams, what's wrong with that strategy? What's wrong with having that kind of ethic?
I thought it was interesting what Molly May said, because, of course, it is literally true. We've all got the same 24 hours in the day. But I think it's a little bit of a kind of like almost a kind of clever wordplay, because no one's disagreeing with the idea we've got the same 24 hours. The point is that if you're working 12 hours a day for £3.50 an hour, i.e. well under the minimum wage, which is what people who work in Molly May's company earn to make those Pretty Little Thing clothes. I should be clear, that's not all Pretty Little Thing workers, that's some of them.
There's the bigger company that owns it, and you're talking about some of the foreign workers who don't earn.
I actually don't know. I think it's in different territories. The point is that there are people who are earning a pittance, working incredibly hard, earning a pittance, and the idea that those people are not working as hard as Molly May, or that if they worked harder then they'd be as successful as her. I mean, that's just obviously a lie, right? That's just obviously not true.
Is the point that she's not making? Firstly, I mean, there's so much I've got to say about this. Firstly, I don't know why people are taking it so personally that, why didn't she mention people who are on low wages? Why didn't she mention people who've got health problems? Why didn't she mention that people are perhaps not born into privilege to start with? Well, why does she need to? She actually does acknowledge that it's not the same for everyone and that she had quite a good start in life. She acknowledges that, but the overall point of what she's saying, and I wrote it down, is if you want something enough, not necessarily financial, but if you want something enough, you can achieve it.
I mean, but that's nonsense. I mean, that is like high level, what the hell are you talking about? Have you never met another human being nonsense? Like, there are so many people who work really, really hard for things and don't achieve them. It is real.
So that's no reason not to have a strategy or not to have an ideology that you do. So what's the opposite? So what's?
Yeah, sure. No, well, I agree.
What's the solution then? We say, well, if you're dealt a bad hand in life and your start is not great, well, just don't bother working because you're not going to get anywhere.
But I'm interested that you think that what I said somehow has that implication. The point is not that you shouldn't work hard. The point is that we shouldn't have an ideology in our society. We shouldn't be telling people success will necessarily come from working hard, because it's a lie.
No, but you've got a far better chance of getting it by working hard.
Yeah.
So why?
But that's different. That's not the same thing,
object to having that ideology in society, number one, and secondly, is the message of what she's not saying that, look, you need to play the hand that you are dealt. It might not be a great hand. Not everyone gets a great hand. That's sad. That's a shame. That's a fact. That's life. I am not going to be a beautiful bikini-wearing influencer. That is not going to happen. And if that was going to be my strategy for success, I would be a bit stupid. So therefore, I have to work with what I have and work hard not to become a bikini cat influencer, but to actually try and get somewhere in life. And by doing that, I've more chance of getting somewhere than if I don't.
Okay, but that is not what Molly May said,
That is exactly what she said.
I'm sorry.
If you work on something enough, you can achieve it. What a great strategy.
I don't think people listening to this will have any trouble in distinguishing between the two different things you said. One is, if you work really hard, then you will succeed. Nonsense. Absolute nonsense. Another is, you have to work really hard to achieve something. True, that is true most of the time. Of course, there are actually lots of people in our society who have become really, really wealthy without working hard because they got it from their parents. Well, you know, that's nice for them and nice for their parents, whatever. But the idea that there is this absolute relationship between working hard and success, it isn't true. Doesn't mean you shouldn't work hard. You should, because you'd be more likely to. But it's not the same thing as what she said.
But I mean, Trista, do you think that the message then shouldn't be out there because for some people that's not going to work?
No, the message should be, you should work hard because you'll have more.
But you might not get success.
But that's true.
But how motivating.
Well, wait, so we should lie to people in order to motivate them?
We should say to them, you have more chance of success if you work hard, if you have that ideology.
Exactly, which is not what Molly May said.
She said, if you work hard, if you want something enough, you can achieve it.
Which is not the same.
But I think you're equating success as well as being brilliantly financially solvent. Maybe what you might want might be that you want to settle down with a family, that you want to become a nurse, a public sector worker.
What about the workers?
A union worker.
What about the workers on $3.50 an hour? Are they not working hard?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if they're working hard enough.
12
well, firstly,
hours a day,
that's not legal, from what I understand.
Oh, how astonishing! Lots of people are in illegal work in this country.
She shouldn't give that message because some people are in illegal work. So what does she have to do?
Because it's a lie about our society. It's not
true.
So
she has an ideology as a young girl that, look, I'm going to go and I'm going to work my backside off to try and achieve what I want. And I think if other people have that ideology, they will be successful too, right?
No,
and what she's supposed to do is actually say, but my caveat to that is those people are on low wages, those people who are in illegal work, those people who are ill or disabled, those people who were born into poverty, those people who perhaps might not be a success, those are my caveats for all of that. That's ridiculous.
The point is this. She said something that isn't true about how our society works. It seems really obvious to me it's not true. If you ask the people listening to this, like, who are the people you know who work really hard, they will not say every single one of them is successful. They will say some of them have succeeded and some of them haven't. That is so obvious, and it's so obvious that what she said isn't true. Why are we trying to defend it?
Why is there an idea that aspiration is a bad thing? Because that's what it is. But
that is not true either.
So, because I think there are two types of people that respond to this.
You're equating aspiration and lying.
No,
it's so odd,
there are two types of people who listen to that. There are the people that say, fair play. She's gone out there. She had some aspiration to do better in her life. And those people who might even be, and those are the people who are out there voting, by the way, who might respond to this on social media or something like that. There are the people that will say, I might not have been a great job, but fair play to her. I don't begrudge her for having that attitude. I don't begrudge her doing that. Or there are the people that say, no, those sorts of ambitions and aspirations are wrong because they don't work for everyone.
Wait, okay, so this is interesting. So you are saying that being aspirational and ambitious is the same as thinking that if you work hard, then there's no way that you can't succeed. I mean, those are obviously not the same things, because one of them is being ambitious.
She said it's not the same for everyone.
Wait. then she said it was the same for everyone. I mean,
she said everyone has the same 24 hours in a day. She acknowledged that she grew up in a form of she didn't even use the word, I think, privilege. She just said that she'd had a good start herself. Not a brilliant start. I don't think she was rolling in wealth. And so she actually gave the caveat. But her strategy, her ideology, the way that she does it, is by working her backside off. And you know what? She tells other people that if they do the same, they can achieve it.
Okay, so I will say
and then we'll go to the sport.
Yeah, I'll say it for the 1,000th time. What she said is literally not true. Secondly, and this is perhaps the most important thing, right? She earns $500,000 a year from Pretty Little Thing. she could not earn that money. They would not have the money in the bank to pay her that if they were not paying their garment. No, it's not what I said. If they were not paying their garment workers incredibly low wages. This is the point, right? Some people get to earn loads because other people get to earn a pittance. Those people who are earning a pittance are working incredibly hard. So the idea that there is this clear relationship between working hard and earning loads is nonsense. She gets to earn loads because they can't even afford to feed their kids properly. That's how capitalism works.
Time for Thursday's political panel. First, the director of the Centre for Labour and Social Studies, Ellie Mayo-Hagan. Ellie, welcome to the Jeremy Carr Drive Show. How are you?
Hi, I'm well, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. Connor Tomlinson, political commentator with Young Voices UK. No doubt I'll be the oldest person in the discussion. Connor, welcome. How are you?
Hello again, Jeremy. Happy New Year.
And to you both. Let's start with Novak Djokovic. I just laid my stall out. You failed to meet the entry requirements. I don't care who you are. Well done, Australia. Ellie, what do you say?
I think that we shouldn't be deporting people because they haven't been vaccinated. That strikes me as going down quite a dangerous path. But, I am pleased that this is giving us an opportunity to actually look at the immigration system in Australia, because it's one that our government in the UK has said that they want to copy in many ways. And what we're finding, and what Djokovic's fans are finding out now, is that it's actually a very cruel and unfair immigration system. So some of the people in the building that Djokovic is staying in have been in a limbo for nearly 10 years. They've been waiting to be told whether they can stay or leave Australia. That's clearly not a system that works. Australia also has offshore detention, which has been criticised by so many organisations in Australia. Can I jump in
and say something? If you believe, right, with respect, that a government's or a country's system of immigration, or in fact any part of that country, is wrong, fundamentally flawed, don't go there and play in their national tennis open and try and win $1 million. Novak Djokovic is trying to get the point I'm making, Ellie, is whether you disagree or agree with their system. I believe that he thought, because he's the number one tennis player in the world and the biggest draw, that they would let him in the side door. And that fundamentally, surely, is the wrong message to send to everyday Australians and other people who've been locked up for months, that somebody can take their private jet and get round the rule makers. That's what I'm saying, I guess.
I couldn't agree with you more about that. I think in the pandemic, we've seen far too much of the wealthiest and most powerful people thinking that they can flout the rules and often getting away with it. So I suppose one area where I am pleased is to see the law applied equally in this case. But I think where I disagree is I think the law itself is wrong and it shouldn't be applied to anybody, because, as I say, if we're going down a path where we're deporting people because they're not vaccinated, I think that's very dangerous and it's something that we need to avoid.
But doesn't a country have a right to say, if they want to stop it, we're not having you in unless you can prove you've been vaccinated? Why is that wrong, Connor?
Well, it's not a question of legality, of course, because a country has the ability to have the national sovereignty to say, we don't have to let you in for any given reason. We're on here to discuss, is it right to do that? Because, of course, Saudi Arabia has every right, air quotes, to say, women can't drive in our country. But we obviously think that's wrong. So I actually agree with Ellie here. You can't, I don't think Australia should be barring people because of the vaccination status. I think the Australian immigration system has merits in its point-based system in terms of work visas for certain jobs you need to do.
But haven't you just made the point? But both of you, I'm sure, would agree with this. And I guess I'd probably come down on the side of both of you. But I will say this. My issue with Jovac, whatever his bloody name is, whatever his name is, I don't really care, Dave. He flew to Australia on his private jet and apparently had been allowed to use a medical exemption, right? Under Australian law. He didn't have the correct exemption. Before we get on our moral high horses and say, the system's wrong, is this not an example of somebody thinking that they're bigger than the law? That's my point. Whether that law is something we disagree with, I think Djokovic was trying to buck the system, and I'm actually quite happy that they've stood up to somebody. It'd be very easy to go, he's the number one tennis player in the world, let's let him in. Don't think that sends a very positive message to your people, does it? in any way.
It's fair to say that he was going to try and circumvent the law. We saw this at the G7, the G20 when they were preaching masks at the Labour Party conference, and they weren't using them.
Yeah.
So it's fair to say the law should apply to everyone equally, varying wealth status, of course. But again, I'm not comfortable with the law being applied at all. I agree with Ellie, and I don't think it's a fair law. So they shouldn't be. He should be penalised for it. He should be allowed to play tennis, especially because it doesn't make any sense to penalise with vaccination status when, what was it, 91% of Australia is vaccinated 16 and up, and then they're having massive case spikes because they've pursued zero COVID. It was never going to happen. Let the man play tennis.
Interesting. Cost of living crisis, Ellie. This is on the tip of everybody's tongue as we head into 2022. We're there already, aren't we? I can't believe that. It's an interesting concept. Everybody seems hung up on political sleaze and Boris Johnson and the green agenda, but the cost of living crisis looms. And Peter Carwell said earlier, will be the real hot political potato in the next 18 months. Do you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, what we're seeing in terms of energy bills is incredibly worrying. You know, a story yesterday said that some people's energy bills might increase by 46% this year, which I just think is absolutely unsustainable for the majority of families. And I think something has gone really wrong with our energy supply system.
There's no doubt. I was asking Peter earlier. There's no doubt there's problems with the energy supply system. There's no doubt that the cost of fuel has gone up, both gas and electricity. What about this quest for zero emissions and Boris Johnson, who used to be blue and is in the red and has now gone green? Many Tory voters would say, and I quote, he needs to get his head out of his green backside and concentrate on other things that matter. They didn't elect him for that. Do you think if he steps back from that obsession he seems to have gained over the last few months, do you think that would make a difference to the cost of energy bills, for example?
Well, I think the research shows that actually renewable energies will reduce people's bills because there's more energy available. And I think, when it comes to tackling the climate crisis, I think there is actually no other urgent issue. There's no issue that is as urgent as
but
this.
Ellie, a majority
it's
of
not
people
something
in
that
this,
we can afford
I completely agree with you, but the majority of the people in this country don't care. They don't actually think like that. They want to pay their mortgages and put food on their table. They do.
I think what you see when you look at when people are asked this question is you can see that climate change goes further and further up the agenda every year, and that's because it does affect ordinary people.
I'm not saying it doesn't, but I'm wondering in a world that becomes harder and harder, being genuine here, harder and harder to make ends meet and do everything that we need to do. Connor, let me ask you as well, is it at the forefront of people's minds, or is it not something that Boris probably decided he should attack and has come to the realisation that it's too difficult, costs too much, and it doesn't please enough people? That's what I think will happen, but that's just my opinion. What's yours?
No, you're dead on. And the cost of living crisis has been exacerbated by bad government policy. Now, I think Ellie and I both agree that net zero is a great idea for national security reasons, like get us off buying oil from Russia, get us off buying batteries from China, for example. We can source all of our energy ethically. Now, is that going to happen with renewables? Ellie's absolutely wrong to say that it would be cheaper to do renewables for energy bills, because I've actually done some research on this. If all of Britain tried to go renewable overnight, it would take all of the batteries in the world from now till 2028 to do it. So that would be no electric cars, no other countries around the world doing renewables, etc. Cost $3 trillion, and it would only make 27% of all of our energy demands, and it wouldn't be able to be protected from blackouts. So it's a terrible, economically suicidal idea that will leave people colder and poorer. So it's
your solution then? Let me just clarify then. Is your solution then that we continue to use fossil fuels and that we end up in a world where even the people in the Australian military have suggested that society itself might not be able to withstand the temperature rises because of the massive disruptive effects it'll have on our lives? Where millions of people are dying of floods and heat waves every year, including people in this country. Are you saying that we should do that instead?
Would you like me to answer the question?
Because
I
think let me finish my point.
You've had quite a lot of time.
Let me finish my point, please. I think when we talk about this issue, we often talk about it as though we have a choice in massive change occurring in our society in the next 10 years. And we don't have a choice about that. Massive change is going to occur in our lives.
Ellie, you've already said this. You asked me a question.
And the only choice we have is what kind of change that is. Is it a better world for our children?
Can I jump in? Can I jump in?
Is it a brown?
Please, Jeremy.
Can I jump in? Can I jump in if I can, just very quickly? And I never ever saw myself as somebody who was a fence sitter because I'm not French, but I will say this to both of you. I absolutely understand, Ellie May O'Hagan, that there should be a responsibility. If you listen to what Connor said at the beginning, he, like you and I, would agree that in an ideal world, this is what people like you won't answer, and I'd love to put this to you, okay? I agree that is in an ideal world what should happen. The fact is, whether intellectuals and political commentators like it or not, the everyday person that listens to shows like this or watches television or watches you two, I'm afraid, whether you like it or not, Ellie, doesn't give a damn right now about that. A majority of people care about their mortgages, their kids' education, having an operation, going on holiday, getting over Omicron or COVID, voting in a new government and paying for every other goddamn thing that seems to land in their lap. And I'm not decrying the importance of it, but what I always want to say is sometimes the ideal is not achievable, and it's the people out there who vote for the government, and it's the people out there who aren't interested in claptrap. They're interested in everyday things. I agree with you, it should happen, but it's not going to, and I'll bet you any money that Boris Johnson steps back from it this year, not just because of the haircut and the new tie, but maybe somebody's got into his brain over Christmas and said, you need to start listening to the people that voted you in, Boris. And they don't. They might care or think that they care, but they're not bothered about 50 years' time. They're bothered about paying their rent at the end of the month, Ellie. That's a fact.
I completely agree with you that we need to deal in reality as it is. And I think that the reality is that most people's lives will be affected quite seriously by climate change in the coming decades. And actually, there are policymakers at the moment, particularly if you look at organisations like Green New Deal UK, that are putting forward ways of tackling the climate crisis that create good jobs for people, that make housing.
Can I move on to one final thing? Because you're going to love this, Ellie May O'Hagan, and you're going to love this, Connor. You've got a minute each. Tory MP Andrew Rossendale, Tory MP, touched the Commons today to demand that the BBC play the national anthem every night before it switches to BBC News 24. The Tory MP for Romford said, I know that the Minister will agree that the singing of the national anthem is something that provides a greater sense of unity and pride in our nation. And so in this year of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, will the Minister, Nadine Dorries, take steps to encourage public broadcasters to play the national anthem and ensure that the BBC restores it at the end of the day's programme before it switches? Culture section Dean Dorries replied, fantastic question. Connor Tomlinson, 1 minute.
Go for it. I don't see how you can object to this, considering the BBC is a state broadcaster. It should pay deference to the country that it owes its and the people that it owes its existence to. I think the only kind of people that can object to this sort of thing are people that dislike the country and feel ashamed of our history. Somewhat, Gary Lineker trying to say that it's somehow North Korean to play the national anthem. No, Gary, it'd be North Korean to play the national anthem in North Korea because we don't have the same values.
Go and live in North Korea then, Gary Lineker, and stop slagging off the system that pays you so much money. You're like Lewis Hamilton. You do my head in. Ellie May O'Hagan, national anthem or not?
I just think it's a silly distraction from the issues that really matter to this people of this country.
You mean paying their rent and paying their mortgages?
Yeah, of course, those issues really do. And let me be clear that because I care about climate change, it doesn't mean that I don't recognise that those things matter to people. I think both things matter. And I think that we as a society are capable of addressing both. And I think that that's what we need to be talking about, and not the national anthem. By the way, can I just mention that I'm Welsh and we have our own national anthem. And if they wanted to play that on the BBC every night, I would be very happy.
Let's get Martin up. Martin in Tottenham, what did you want to say?
Representation of January 6th, absolutely despicable. When you have someone like Kamala Harris, when you have people like AOC, when you have people like Ilhan Omar, Maxine Waters, who were calling for Republicans to be attacked, to be pulled out of restaurants, saying that Black Lives Matter should be out there in the streets the year before, when you had Black Lives Matter Antifa burning down people's businesses, and you had the Democrats bailing out rioters, making sure that the police did not take these people down who had killed people, David Dawn who was killed, and yet you people, CNN, covered it up. You covered it up, made out as peaceful protests. And this thing that happened in Jan 6 was the only time that the so-called Trump supporters on right wing for 3 hours had agitators at the front. The only person who was directly killed was an innocent lady, a Trump supporter called Ashley Babbitt.
Whoa. Hang on. The police were attacked, and as I said, 140 law enforcement. Are you saying that it wasn't violent?
I never said it wasn't violent, but it was only 3 hours. Yet no, Kamala Harris didn't mention Ashley Babbitt's name. They did a Virgil and made out it was something in comparison to Pearl Harbor and 9/11. That is disgusting. Where were they calling out the BLM? I still haven't heard Kamala Harris or Joe Biden call out the BLM or the Antifa killers that were burning down police stations, courthouses.
Okay. Let's let Liz.
Can I interject with a couple of things? I mean, first of all, straight up, I totally agree with you that Maxine Waters is a deplorable person, and much of her rhetoric is absolutely awful. And if I had my way, both she and President Trump would be completely exiled from American politics, basically forever. But to some of your points, I mean, first of all, we're not on CNN here, so I think what their coverage is needs to be left to one side. But also, if you're talking about Joe Biden condemning things, actually during the campaign, Joe Biden did condemn rioting that occurred surrounding the BLM protests. He actually did do that. So, it didn't get a lot of media attention. You may not have heard about it, but it did in fact happen. And I think that's important. I also would like to say, as somebody who has been targeted for violence, very, very brutal violence by Trump supporters, yes, this was a 3-hour instance. And I'm not a big fan of comparing this to 9/11, to World War II, to Pearl Harbor, to the Civil War, just as I'm not a fan of comparing the Holocaust to what happened in Bosnia, to what happened in Rwanda, to what happens with regard to, the Rohingya minority when you're looking at Myanmar. But I also will tell you that as somebody who spoke out against former President Trump when he was a candidate in 2015 and 2016, I was threatened with beheading. My child was threatened with beheading. My husband was threatened with beheading. There were violent people who physically called my mother at home and threatened our family. This is in a different house to mine. So when people want to make out that this was an isolated instance and that you don't have a problem with violence writ large with a lot of these really hardcore Trumpers, I can personally tell you that that's just not true. Now, you can say that we have a problem with people on the extremes in both parties and across the political spectrum in America getting increasingly violent and getting increasingly agitated. And I would agree with you there. But I think what's important is to hold all of those people accountable. And what's going on with January 6th right now, I think that's actually part of that process.
Yeah, thank you.
I've had death threats before. That doesn't make you special. If you're in the public, if you're in the
I'm not saying it does make me that's actually my point, is that it doesn't make you special. My point is that it's become extraordinarily normal in America, and that's what's really bad and awful about it. And that I think that there's a lot that needs to go on in our political culture to rein that in.
Whoa. Martin, hang on. One of the things we're talking about is aggression and violence. And one reason that comes about is from people not hearing other people. They're so focused on their own anger for their own issues that they don't actually hear what the other person's saying. So what Liz is saying is, and Liz is someone who has been a spokesperson for the Republican Party, so it's not them and us. She's saying that violence on any extreme is bad and can be demonstrated. It doesn't make one thing better or worse than the other. And she's talking about where you get your news from and what view you say. When you talk about the media, it's not one big organization. There's left-wing media and right-wing media. It depends on what you see. Martin, thank you so much for your call.
He looked after the pennies if he could, didn't he, some would say?
Good afternoon, Nick. Yes, and he tried very hard on a number of occasions to improve the efficiency with which government used money. There were a whole number of efficiency drives and value for money drives. And it is something, as you say, that in a way, all governments can be accused of not spending money wisely. Some of them spend more time trying to address that question than others. And I think what's interesting about this intervention by the head of the NAO, the National Audit Office today, is that it's not just another report that's come out. This is an opinion column written by the head in the Times. And I think he's making not just a general point about governments in general, but a rather specific one about this government. We know that a lot of money has been spent on the pandemic over the last 2 years. And in many cases, the procedures that Whitehall has in place to try and get decent value for money out of that spending have been abandoned. So we normally have procurement policies, like most companies would have, which require that you get at least 3 tenders, and it's the best value for money tender that is chosen. These procedures were abandoned for many of the COVID contracts, where we know not just were they abandoned so they went without a competitive tender, but there was a VIP lane for contacts of cabinet ministers. That's very irregular. Some people have said it could be almost corrupt.
But these were irregular times, though.
This is quite specific, I think, about this government. Sorry.
So, yeah, I shouldn't have interrupted you, but your point you're making, absolutely not challenging anything you said there, except these were irregular times. And I got the sense, because of the example that Gareth Davis used, he, for example, picked up on the Kickstart project, which is a typical programme. Labour could have invented that programme, quite frankly. It was all about trying to get people back into work, etc. And he's kind of basically saying it's because of the lack of discipline in the way the project was run and the benchmarks, if you like, it's going to be virtually impossible to claim whether the money's been spent wisely or not. So aside from the pandemic, because I think you made your point there, isn't that the trouble with government, that they're not really operating like most businesses would, which would be trying to demand that to prove that they had value for money?
I think that's correct. And the Kickstarter scheme is a very interesting one, because it isn't an idea that Labour could have done something like this. It did do something like this. It was called the Future Jobs Fund when unemployment was very high after the financial crisis. And the lessons from that scheme should have been learned for the Kickstarter scheme. That is, within the last decade, we've had a very similar kind of programme. And there wasn't any evaluation of that scheme that went into the Kickstarter programme. And because officials, civil servants, move on after 2 years or so, very few of them who were involved 10 years ago in the Labour scheme will have been around in the relevant department now to ensure that those lessons were learned. And I think this is a general problem in government, that the lessons are not learned, particularly from one administration to another. If you go on the website of any government department looking for a previous government's policies, you won't find them. Even though this is the UK government and it's still the same institutions, they've all been relegated to a website it's quite difficult to find. And I think officials, and particularly ministers, often treat their new government as kind of year zero, and they reinvent everything. And I think this is a serious problem. And there's also, as Gareth Davis points out in his article today in the Times, there is a sense in which ministers are so keen to say, I'm doing something new. They don't look at what's been done in the past.
Well, look,
and that is a problem, I think.
I want to come on to that, and I'm going to try and avoid making party political points, by the way, because I could well remember pointing to Labour's some failed expenditures. I'm sure they could have learned lessons as well, but I won't go down that road because I think it's less interesting than what we're about to talk about. Something that I think Labour started and has continued in politics is that we seem to measure success by how much money we've spent. Now, let me give you an example, because I have no idea if this would have happened under Gordon Brown's administration or not. My brief time, I was actually in government, not as an MP. I used to get a weekly email from the then Chief of Staff to Theresa May, who would head it up with government achievements. And I would be really excited, because I would think, this is great. I can go out and trumpet our achievements. It was a long list of where we spent money alongside a project's name, like Kickstart or whatever. There was absolutely no hint of the value for money or the outcomes we are getting. And it's almost like politics has just become too transactional now, hasn't it? The public want me to solve a problem. That means they want us to spend money. Labour would talk about it in the past. You know, we spent more on the NHS. We're doing that now, or whatever. Isn't that what's wrong? No one's challenging and asking, what is the outcome? What's the value for money?
I think that's a very good point. I don't think it's completely true that Labour only ever measured its activities in terms of money spend. It's a very easy way to communicate with journalists who who generally like numbers, and it's a very easy way to stick a number in a headline and make it sound large, frankly, whatever the number is. But Labour, if you remember, adopted a series of things called public service agreements between the Treasury under Gordon Brown and the individual ministries, which said that for the money that you're getting from the Treasury, you have to achieve these outcomes. And they weren't, you have to spend this amount of money. It was, you have to achieve these outcomes. So you'll remember, for example, that the Department for Health was required to reduce waiting lists, and indeed reduced them originally to 18 weeks and then to 4 weeks. And under the Labour government, waiting lists for operations, elective operations, went down to 4 weeks. Now, that was a specific outcome, which was the contract, if you like, between the Treasury and the Health Department in the health service public service agreement. And we had similar things for crime probation, for levels of crime, for the number of young people who are prevented from going into prison, for education, for class sizes, for attainment results. So I don't think it's true that under the Labour government, the only thing that mattered was money. On the contrary, that government tried very hard to say the money is going on this or that, but that system
but I think we're slightly getting off
was
the point.
abandoned under David Cameron, unfortunately.
Well, Michael, I think we're going slightly off the point, because I could remember press releases even with the current administration.
I'm not doubting that there were press releases. I'm just saying they weren't the only measure.
No,
which is
fair enough. But I suppose what I'm trying to get at here is that there'll be a press release by this government that come out and say we're going to spend 50 million on this and it's going to provide X number of jobs or do this or whatever. There's its perceived outcome. How do we address the constant failure, though? Because the National Audit Office presumably is just going to continue highlighting these. Is there anything we can do to actually really hold government to account? Because this would get 5 minutes in the House of Commons and then it will be forgotten and we'll be on to the next thing. I mean, I'm quite incensed as a taxpayer about all of this going on. Is there anything we can really do?
Well, it's not quite true that it only gets 5 minutes. The select committees for each of the major departments do look at the expenditure and the outcomes that have been achieved. So you'll often get, as well as National Audit Office reports, you'll get reports by select committees saying that this has been well spent, this has achieved its goals, or quite often it hasn't been, and then giving recommendations for how it could be done better in the future. And that is, of course, what you want Parliament to do. It's what the backbench MPs who sit on select committees should be doing. Not often reported, I have to say, by the media.
Or well attended in the House of Commons, Michael.
No, select committees are private. I mean, they're public. They're all televised.
Except when they debate the report. If the report comes into the House of Commons to be debated, you're lucky if anyone else apart from the health select turn up.
That is true, but the select committees do issue media releases, and I think it is up to journalists and newspapers and broadcasters like yourself to make sure that those reports become pressure points for government. So how do we get this improved? I think ministers need to feel pressure for the outcomes of the projects and programmes that they've announced. And that doesn't happen enough. Too much of the media, if I may say this, is focused on the announcement, the very problem that you're saying, and not enough on the outcomes. And what's left often is for professional bodies or for non-governmental organisations, campaigners to say, look, this hasn't worked. And of course, they only get limited play in the media as well. So I think this is a responsibility of Parliament. I agree with you. I think there's a responsibility on government, and not just the ministers, but the civil service, to ensure that programmes are properly evaluated. One of the really awful findings from this NAO report is that only 8% of major projects currently in government have evaluation plans in place. And of course, you need to put an evaluation plan in place when you do it, not just after the event, so you're collecting data all the time.
No, that's an absolutely fair point. And I totally agree with you about the 8% there, Michael. The fact that if you're only going to put evaluation plans for 8%, the chances are you're not going to get 100% evaluation of anything.